I could hear the music playing long before I walked into the wedding hall. My son's wedding day, a moment I had dreamed of since the day I first held him in my arms. My heart raced with pride, but also with nerves. All I wanted was to see him happy, to stand by his side on the most important day of his life. I smoothed down the folds of my dress, an old but cherished piece of fabric I had kept carefully tucked away for years. It wasn't new, it wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. My late husband had given it to me decades ago, when times were hard but our love was strong. To me, it wasn't just clothing. It was a memory, a piece of my heart, a reminder that love outlasts everything. I wore it with pride, but the moment I stepped inside, I felt the shift. The whispers first, then the stares, and finally, the laughter. The bride's family, dressed in shimmering gowns and glittering jewels, looked me up and down as though I were a beggar who had stumbled into their palace. One woman clutched her pearls and giggled. Another sneered, covering her mouth but not her eyes. Their laughter cut sharper than any knife. In that instant, they weren't just mocking a dress. They were mocking me, the mother of the groom, my son's own family by marriage. And yet, I stayed quiet. I forced a smile, swallowed the sting of humiliation, and sat down as if nothing had happened. But inside, something shifted. They thought they had silenced me with ridicule. What they didn't know was that I carried more than memories in that old dress. I carried secrets, strength, and before the night was over, I would give them something to laugh about, in their very own honeymoon suite. I remember the exact moment it began. The church was filled with flowers, golden ribbons, and the soft glow of candles. A scene pulled straight from the pages of a bridal magazine. Guests laughed and mingled, clinking their glasses, adjusting their ties, fixing their hair. For a brief moment as I walked through those doors, I felt proud. My son, the boy I raised with my bare hands, the boy I once carried on my back when his legs grew tired, the boy who leaned on me when life felt heavy, he was about to marry the woman of his dreams. But then, I noticed it. The whispers. At first they were soft, almost like the rustling of leaves in the wind. I thought perhaps I imagined them. I kept my head held high, clutching the small purse I had owned for years. The one that held little more than a tissue, my glasses, and a picture of my late husband. I took a seat near the aisle, adjusting the folds of my dress with careful, deliberate hands. And that's when I saw the looks. Two women at the front, relatives of the bride, I assumed, leaned close together. One cupped her hand against the other's ear, and both burst into muffled laughter. Their eyes darted toward me, then quickly away, pretending they weren't looking. But I knew. Oh, I knew. I had been laughed at before in my life. I had been underestimated, judged, even ridiculed for being too plain, too quiet, too poor. I recognized the signs. The whispers spread like fire catching on dry grass. Heads turned, smiles twisted into smirks. I sat perfectly still, though inside I felt my chest tighten. And then the words came. Clear, cruel, loud enough that they wanted me to hear. "Can you believe she wore that?" One woman hissed. "Looks like she pulled it out of an old thrift store," another replied. A man chuckled under his breath. "The groom's mother? In that? My goodness, the poor boy must be embarrassed." Poor. That word landed like a slap across my face. Yes, my dress was old. Yes, it wasn't stitched by a famous designer, but to me, it was more valuable than any jewel they flaunted on their necks. My late husband had given it to me during a time when we had nothing but each other. It was simple, pale blue with faded lace at the sleeves, but every thread carried a memory. He had surprised me with it one evening, slipping it into my hands with the shy grin of a man who wanted to give his wife the world, even if all he could afford was one beautiful dress. To me, it was love woven into fabric. To them, it was something to laugh at. I lowered my eyes, pretending to be fascinated with the bouquet near the altar. Inside, my heart stung. My throat burned as if I had swallowed fire. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I forced them back. Not here. Not today. This was my son's wedding. His moment. I would not ruin it by letting these people see me crumble. I took a deep breath and steadied myself, reminding my heart of something it seemed to forget. I had been through worse. Much worse. I thought of the years I worked double shifts at the diner, standing on aching feet until midnight just so my son could have shoes that didn't fall apart. I thought of the nights I skipped meals so he could eat, the winters I wore the same coat year after year while saving every dollar for his school books. I thought of the birthdays I went without gifts, only to see his face light up when he unwrapped the toy he had been dreaming of. Did anyone in that room know the price I paid? Did anyone know the sacrifices? Of course not. They only saw a dress. An old, worn dress. The laughter grew bolder. One of the bride's cousins, a young woman with perfectly styled hair and lips painted a sharp red, turned to her friend and stage whispered, "She looks like she came straight out of the kitchen." The friend laughed so hard she nearly spilled her champagne. An older man smirked and muttered, "Guess the groom's side of the family didn't get the memo about class." My hands clenched into fists inside my lap. For a moment I wanted to rise, to shout, to tell them everything. How hard I fought, how much I gave, how ungrateful their judgment was. But then I looked up and saw him. My son. He stood near the altar, adjusting his tie nervously, glancing toward the doors as though waiting for his bride. He looked so handsome, so grown, yet I could still see the little boy in him. The one who used to fall asleep with his head on my shoulder. The one who once told me, "Don't worry, Mom, one day I'll take care of you." And I knew. This was his day, not mine. His happiness mattered more than my pride. So I stayed quiet. I forced a small smile onto my face. Even as my insides twisted into knots, the laughter didn't stop. If anything, it grew louder, more confident, as though my silence was permission. The bride's mother herself walked past me, her perfume overwhelming, her diamond necklace catching the light. She glanced at me from head to toe, her lips curling into a smirk. She leaned toward another guest and whispered, "Some people don't belong in places like this." My cheeks burned hot. Not from shame, no, I was long past being ashamed of who I was, but from the cruel injustice of it all. I had raised a good man. I had worked myself to the bone to give him a chance at this very life. And here I sat, mocked and dismissed by people who had no idea who I truly was. I wanted to cry, but instead, I let the memories fill me, the sacrifices, the nights of worry, the years of silent strength. Each memory was like armor against their cruelty. Let them laugh, I thought. They see only the outside. They don't know the truth. And as I sat there, head high despite the whispers that stung like thorns, I made a promise to myself. I would not let them break me. I would not let them define me by an old dress. And though I remained silent that night, though I smiled politely as though their words rolled off my back, I began to plan. For silence can be a weapon, and dignity, when mocked, can become the sharpest blade of all. They thought they had won when they saw me sit quietly. But little did they know, the laughter that echoed through that hall would soon turn into silence they would never forget. I sat there, folding my hands neatly in my lap, every muscle in my body tense with the desire to stand, to speak, to let the world know I was not to be trifled with. Yet I did nothing. No words escaped my lips. No harsh glare met the smug eyes that dared to ridicule me. I chose silence. Deliberate, unyielding, silent strength that only those who truly understand life can recognize. The whispers around me continued like a low, buzzing storm that threatened to drown out my composure, but I refused to respond. I refused to stoop to their level. In that moment, I realized something crucial. Dignity is far more potent than anger. Dignity cannot be purchased, flaunted, or mocked. It is something internal, something you carry quietly with you even when the world tries to strip it away. And while I sat there, composed, I observed. Oh, how I observed. The bride's family moved through the hall with calculated grace, their laughter clipped, their smiles practiced. Every glance, every gesture screamed wealth, superiority, and entitlement. Their jewelry sparkled like tiny stars, perfectly matched to designer gowns that hugged their bodies in all the right places. They did not just walk into the room. They announced themselves as if to claim the space and mark everyone else as beneath them. I watched them carefully, the way they held their champagne glasses like scepters, the way they whispered behind hands that were manicured to perfection, each nail a tiny monument to meticulous care and privilege. The way they leaned slightly, as though their bodies alone carried authority, as though the weight of their bank accounts and social standing demanded respect. And yet, none of it moved me. Not really. Inside, my mind wandered back to the years I had spent raising my son. The years that had demanded everything of me. My energy, my youth, my sanity at times. I thought of the first apartment we rented together. Tiny, drafty, and filled with peeling wallpaper. I remembered the nights I worked late shifts while he slept on the couch, dreaming of the bright future I promised him. I remembered missing birthdays, missing outings, sometimes missing sleep, all for the sake of his happiness. I had no designer gowns, no glittering jewelry, no perfectly coiffed hair, but I had something far richer: resilience, experience, and an unwavering love that had endured every hardship life threw my way. So I sat. I smiled. A quiet, small smile that carried none of the anger boiling inside me but all of the strength I had cultivated over decades. I let them flaunt their wealth. Let them parade their superiority. Let them whisper and point and laugh. Their world, their rules, their fleeting triumphs. They meant nothing to me. I remember one moment vividly. The bride's mother, tall and elegant, approached the center of the hall, adjusting the diamond necklace that gleamed under the chandeliers. She glanced in my direction, her eyes sharp, measuring as if daring me to respond. A smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. She assumed my silence was weakness, assumed my quiet was a concession. But I knew better. My silence was intentional. My silence was a statement louder than any words I could utter. The groom's sisters, flitting about like butterflies with wings of silk and satin, whispered behind their hands, glancing at me, pretending not to. I caught their eyes briefly and gave them a small nod, polite, calm, unshaken. The look on their faces, a mixture of confusion and disbelief, told me everything I needed to know. They expected tears. They expected outrage. They expected me to crumble. And I did not. I reflected on something I had learned over the years: appearances can be deceiving. The sparkle of a diamond, the shine of a gown, the smoothness of a smile. None of that guarantees worth. True strength, true dignity, is quiet. It is measured not by the eyes that look upon you, but by the heart that beats within you. And in that hall, amidst the laughter and whispers, I carried my dignity like a shield, invisible but unbreakable. They flaunted their wealth. They flaunted their social superiority. They flaunted their perfectly polished lives. But in their polished world, they lacked something vital: respect, humility, and the wisdom that comes only from having lived, having sacrificed, having loved so fiercely that you give all and still demand nothing in return. Every moment I sat there, I built my resolve. Every smirk, every giggle, every whispered comment became fuel for something far greater than revenge. It was the knowledge that they would never, ever truly see me. Not now, not ever. As long as they clung only to their shallow judgments. But the day would come when their laughter would stop. The day would come when their eyes would widen in shock at what they had underestimated. And I would be ready. For now, though, I stayed still. I observed. I let the room fill with their pomp and pretense. I let them parade themselves as queens and princes of this fleeting, glittering kingdom. And all the while I remained calm, composed, silent. A mother who had been underestimated, dismissed, and mocked, but who carried within her a quiet power that could not be bought, borrowed, or mocked away. I watched the younger women whisper about me, their eyes rolling in exaggerated sympathy or amusement. I watched the older men glance in my direction and scoff, clearly considering me a relic of another era, irrelevant and laughable. And I thought to myself, quietly, firmly, let them laugh, let them scoff, let them whisper. They had not yet seen what it meant to mock a woman who had lived, who had given everything, who had endured everything, and who had learned that true power is quiet. True power is patience, observation, and the ability to act with precision when the moment is right. And so I smiled again, this time a little wider, just enough for the corner of my lips to betray nothing, just enough to hide the fire that was quietly burning inside me. I smiled because I knew appearances can fool the eyes, but they cannot fool the heart. And mine, steady, strong, and unbroken, was preparing for what was to come. The bride's family continued their parade, unaware that with every step they took, every gesture of superiority, every laugh at my expense, they were writing the prologue of a story they would never forget. I sat there, silent but aware, invisible yet fully present, watching them reveal themselves in ways they would later regret. Because dignity, true dignity, cannot be mocked, and tonight I was the one carrying it. As I sat there, pretending to sip my water, smiling politely, I felt the room spinning in slow motion around me. The laughter, the whispers, the pointed glances, they all blurred into a single, continuous hum. But beneath that calm exterior, my mind was alive. Sharp, calculating, aware. I let them think I was powerless. Let them think that a mother in a faded blue dress, a widow of modest means, had no influence, no resources, no secrets. Little did they know. I carried more power than they could ever imagine. I let my eyes wander to the glittering bridesmaids, the sparkling jewelry, the designer gowns. Each one screamed privilege, wealth, and entitlement. They were the kind of people who measured life in possessions, comparing the shine of stones and the fabric of dresses rather than character or heart. And yet they looked at me as if I were beneath them, as if my worth was measured solely by what I wore or the house I lived in. I smiled at them. Yes, I smiled, because appearances can be deceiving. And I knew it better than anyone. A memory came to me suddenly, vivid and warm, cutting through the sting of their mockery. It was my late husband sitting at the worn kitchen table late one night, papers spread across the surface, a cup of coffee cooling beside him. His hands were tired, knotted from years of hard work, but his eyes still carried a spark of mischief and pride. "Don't ever forget," he said, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. "We may not have the diamonds they wear or the gowns they flaunt, but we have something they will never understand. Security, freedom, control, and one day it will matter more than any dress or any laugh." I had kept his words close. His legacy, built quietly, patiently, over decades of careful saving, smart investments, and thoughtful planning, was hidden from the world. The house they thought we barely managed, paid in full. The savings they assumed were modest, more than enough to make someone like me untouchable. Even the jewelry they thought absent, small, understated, but worth more than all the trinkets they displayed, rested in a safe, known only to me. They had no idea. I recalled another moment, the late nights I spent poring over bills, bank statements, and stock portfolios. My husband had taught me that wealth, like power, is best wielded quietly. He had whispered secrets of finance, investments, and legacies into my ear, trusting me with them completely. And I had learned. Oh, how I had learned. I was no naive, trembling widow in an old dress. I was a woman armed with knowledge, security, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes only from surviving life's storms and emerging stronger each time. As I observed the bride's family, their arrogance burning like fire in my mind, I realized just how misplaced their judgment was. They believed in appearances. They believed in mockery. They believed in the illusion of superiority. And because of that, they had unknowingly exposed their greatest weakness: arrogance. I smiled again, letting the corners of my lips curl upward just slightly. My silence was not fear. It was calculation. My stillness was not submission. It was strategy. And as I sat, something began to stir in my mind. A thought, almost a whisper, that grew louder with each passing moment. A plan. A seed of revenge. Not a rash act, not something born of petty anger, but something precise, deliberate, and unforgettable. I thought of the honeymoon suite. The keys would be in my hands tonight. Every luxurious detail they took for granted, every indulgent expectation could be turned against them. Not in public, not in a scene that would embarrass my son, but quietly, privately, in a way that would teach them a lesson they would never forget. Yes, I would remain composed in front of everyone. Yes, I would smile as they laughed and whispered and pointed. But inside, I was no longer just the quiet mother. I was a woman planning the perfect demonstration of power, a subtle and sharp reminder that those who mock others often do so blind to the strength beneath. I thought about my son, standing at the altar, nervous but happy, oblivious to the storm brewing quietly in the mind of his mother. He had always depended on me, often without realizing it, and I had always provided. And tonight, I would continue to provide, not only for him but for the lesson the bride's family needed to learn. Every smirk, every snicker, every pointed glance fueled the thought, sharpened the plan, built the fire in my chest. The room might have seen a fragile woman in an old dress, but I knew better. I was untouchable, not because of money alone, though that was part of it, but because of patience, foresight, and the understanding that true power is never loud. True power is measured by the effect it can produce quietly, invisibly, when others are too blind to notice. I recalled late nights alone after my husband passed, sitting in the quiet of our living room, staring at the modest furniture we had chosen together, thinking about the years we had worked, saved, and built. My children had been young then, my life consumed by their needs. But I had learned. I had understood that one day, knowledge, strategy, and patience would be the greatest gifts I could carry forward. And now, at this wedding, surrounded by laughter and judgment, that knowledge had a purpose. The bride's family believed I was weak. They believed I had nothing to give. They believed I was powerless. I let them think that. But as I watched them revel in their perceived superiority, I knew the truth. I was not powerless. I had resources, I had plans, and I had patience. And I would use them all, quietly, to deliver a message that would resonate far longer than any insult they could hurl in this gilded hall. I thought of the keys I would carry to their suite. I imagined the look on their faces when they discovered the subtle but undeniable proof that I was not to be underestimated. It was not about revenge born from anger. It was about justice. It was about dignity. It was about proving, in a manner they could neither ignore nor belittle, that a quiet woman in an old dress could wield more power than they could ever imagine. And as the bride's family continued their laughter, oblivious to the quiet storm gathering behind my calm smile, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This night would not end the way they expected. They would remember me. They would respect me. And they would never, ever mock me again without thinking twice. Because some truths, when revealed at the right time, leave no room for ridicule. And some people, when underestimated, learn their greatest lessons quietly and devastatingly. I sipped my water again, gently, deliberately, as if nothing had happened. The music swelled, the laughter continued, the room moved around me in a blur of glitter and silk. And yet, I was still. I was calm. I was patient. I was ready. For the first time that evening, I allowed a real smile to touch my lips. Not the polite one I had been wearing, but a small, knowing smile, the kind that only someone who has carried secrets and power for decades can wear. Tonight they thought they were winning. Tonight they believed the quiet mother had no power. But in the shadows of my calm, the seeds of justice had already been planted. And they would grow faster, stronger, and more unforgettable than any laughter the bride's family could conjure. I leaned back slightly, letting my presence fade into the background of the hall, a ghost among the glittering. But inside I was very much alive and very much preparing. The night had just begun, and I had the advantage they would never see coming. As the evening stretched on and the wedding festivities continued around me, I sat quietly at my table, watching the laughter, the clinking glasses, the bright smiles that masked the arrogance of the bride's family. No one suspected what was quietly forming in my mind. No one could see the careful calculations unfolding behind the calm exterior I displayed. I had long learned the value of patience. Anger, I had discovered, was a fleeting weapon. It burned bright and hot, but it often left the wielder exposed, vulnerable, and regretting their haste. No, my approach would be different. My revenge would not be loud, dramatic, or reckless. It would be quiet. It would be precise. It would be inescapable. I remembered the lessons my late husband had taught me. Strength is most powerful when hidden, and timing is everything. I had kept my resources carefully, knowing that one day they might serve a purpose far greater than comfort or security. Tonight, that purpose had arrived. The plan began to take shape as I sipped my water, letting the music and chatter fill the air around me. It was simple in concept, but perfect in execution. I would use what I had: the keys to the honeymoon suite, the quiet knowledge of our family's legacy, and the careful timing of when they would least suspect it, to deliver a message that no laughter could ever erase. I visualized the suite, a small, elegant room adorned with flowers and luxurious touches, a temporary palace for the newlyweds to begin their life together. It was here that my subtle but undeniable justice would unfold. Every detail mattered. I imagined the sheets, soft and white, the balcony overlooking the gardens, the faint scent of roses lingering in the air. And in that space, I would leave a reminder of what had been overlooked, what had been underestimated, and what should never be mocked. I began planning quietly, meticulously, in my mind. What would I leave behind? It had to be something that spoke louder than words, something that would make them pause, reflect, and remember. Not humiliation for its own sake, but a lesson in respect, dignity, and the consequences of arrogance. First, I considered the personal items I had discreetly kept over the years, valuable but understated, enough to hint at the hidden strength they had mocked. Perhaps a small token of wealth, a subtle symbol of the legacy they assumed I lacked. Something that would quietly shock them without drawing attention to my involvement at the moment. Next, I thought about symbolism. The bride's family had mocked the dress I wore, the simplicity of my life, and the sacrifices I had made. So the surprise had to carry meaning, a reminder that appearances are deceiving, that the worth of a person is never measured by what they flaunt in public. A quiet, calculated reflection of the very arrogance they had displayed. I pictured the moment they would discover it, arriving in the suite, giddy with excitement, expecting privacy and indulgence, only to encounter the subtle evidence of my foresight, my planning, and my quiet power. The realization would not come immediately. They would first feel the confusion, then the dawning awareness. And when it hit, it would be unforgettable. As the music swelled and guests danced, I felt a thrill of satisfaction in my calmness. No confrontation was necessary, Theirs was a victory of ignorance. Mine would be a victory of patience and strategy. I had learned long ago that quiet power is often more devastating than the loudest shouts. I remembered sitting in our living room years ago with my husband, poring over documents, carefully managing our finances. Every investment, every savings account, every hidden asset had been chosen with precision. And tonight, those years of careful preparation would pay off. The bride's family assumed they had the upper hand, yet they had no idea that their mockery, their arrogance, and their superficial judgments had laid the groundwork for this moment. I visualized their reactions again: confusion, disbelief, subtle panic, and finally the understanding that they had underestimated me. Not a scream, not a scene, just the quiet realization that their assumptions about who I was had been completely wrong. That realization would be my triumph. I also considered the timing carefully. I would not rush. I would not act until the right moment when the room was empty and the newlyweds were distracted, consumed by their excitement and their self-importance. Timing was everything. My silence throughout the reception was a part of the plan, a calculated act to ensure they never suspected my intentions. As I sat, I felt the familiar pulse of excitement in my chest, a mixture of anticipation and satisfaction. Revenge was not about anger, I reminded myself. It was about justice, subtle and precise, delivered in a way that forced reflection rather than spectacle. My quiet composure, my patience, and my foresight would ensure that the message was received exactly as intended. I imagined leaving a simple note, carefully worded, that spoke not of vengeance, but of awareness. A note that would accompany the subtle token I planned to place, something that reminded them of the arrogance they had displayed, of the mother they had mocked, and of the quiet power that had been invisible to them until this very moment. I also considered the story this action would tell my son, my own child. He would see that his mother did not need to fight, shout, or humiliate anyone to command respect. He would understand that strength often comes quietly, that dignity is not measured by others' approval, and that justice can be achieved without lowering oneself to petty confrontations. Every detail mattered: the placement of the items, the timing of the note, the subtlety of the gesture. The goal was not spectacle, but impact. The bride's family would not expect it. They would never see it coming. And when they realized what had happened, they would be forced to confront their own arrogance, their own lack of awareness, and their own underestimation of the quiet woman in the old dress. I recalled again my husband's words: "Patience and foresight are your greatest weapons. Use them wisely, and you will always have the upper hand." Tonight, those words guided me. Tonight, I wielded those weapons with precision. I sipped my water slowly, deliberately, letting each moment stretch, letting my calmness radiate outward. No one suspected the storm gathering behind my serene exterior. No one realized that every glance, every whisper, every laugh had been carefully catalogued, stored in my memory as evidence of their arrogance. And now that evidence would serve a purpose far greater than any immediate retaliation. The plan was set. The pieces were in place. The execution would be flawless because it required no confrontation, no anger, no chaos. Only the quiet, deliberate act of a woman who had been underestimated for too long. I leaned back slightly in my chair, letting the room move around me in its glittering chaos. The bride's family continued to flaunt their wealth and superiority, completely unaware that their judgment, their arrogance, and their laughter had sown the seeds for a moment they would never forget. I smiled quietly, knowing that the night was mine, that the surprise, hidden and subtle, would speak louder than any words could, that the quiet mother in the old dress would finally be seen, respected, and remembered for her patience, her foresight, and her strength. And as I sat there, calm and composed, the plan clear and precise in my mind, I understood something deeply. True justice requires no spectacle. It requires no shouting, no confrontation, no theatrics. It requires only awareness, patience, and the courage to act when the moment is right. Tonight, the moment was near, and when it came, it would be unforgettable. The night had grown quiet. The last of the guests had departed, leaving the hall in a soft glow of candlelight, the echoes of laughter lingering like shadows that refused to fade. I remained seated at my table for a few more moments, savoring the calm, allowing the anticipation to build like a slow, controlled heartbeat. Every detail had been carefully planned, every step considered. My composure was unbroken, my mind clear. The moment was almost upon me. I rose from my chair, adjusted my dress, and made my way to the suite. The key rested in my hand, cool and weighty, a simple instrument that carried the promise of revelation. I approached the door with deliberate care, each step quiet, measured, as if I were moving through a dream where time stretched and slowed. The suite was pristine. Soft light from the bedside lamps highlighted the delicate linens, the carefully arranged roses, the shimmering glassware left untouched by the newlyweds. It smelled faintly of flowers, a delicate, sweet aroma that made the room feel untouched, sacred even. And yet tonight it would not remain untouched, not in the way they imagined. I placed the envelope on the desk first. Inside, a single note written in my neat, careful handwriting. Some things are never as they seem. Appearances can be deceiving. Remember that. I then added the token, subtle but unmistakable, a symbol of the resources and foresight they had mocked. Not flashy, not loud, but undeniable. Every detail was deliberate, positioned where it would catch the eye, where curiosity would force recognition. It was a quiet message, yet one that demanded attention, reflection, and humility. I stepped back, allowed the weight of the room to settle, and left quietly. No scene, no confrontation, no drama, just the knowledge that what I had done would speak for itself. That was the beauty of my plan. The elegance of true revenge lies in restraint, in subtlety, in allowing the recipient to arrive at their own realization, to feel the shock, confusion, and regret wash over them without a word spoken in accusation. Later, I imagined their arrival. The bride and her family, giddy with excitement, bursting into the suite with laughter still lingering in their voices, confident in their victory, confident in their triumph. They assumed the room belonged entirely to them. That confidence would be the first thing to crumble. The first sign came when her mother noticed the envelope. A fleeting glance, curious, dismissive at first, as if it were merely a note from housekeeping or a forgotten message from the reception. But as she unfolded it, the words struck. She paused mid-sentence, a delicate hand frozen in the air, the tip of her fingers brushing the paper as if hesitant to touch the truth. Her lips parted slightly, and for the first time that evening, her laughter faltered. The bride noticed it immediately, peering over her mother's shoulder, eyes wide with curiosity, expecting perhaps a congratulatory message, a thoughtful note, or even a humorous aside, but instead she read, and slowly, the corners of her smile began to twitch, falter, and then disappear entirely. I imagined the flicker of confusion, the subtle, involuntary shift in posture as they absorbed the reality of the words. That confident, self-assured demeanor, so carefully curated, began to waver. She glanced around the room instinctively, as if seeking validation, as if someone else might explain this sudden uncertainty. There was no one, only the room, the token, and the truth I had placed there. Then, recognition began to dawn, not loud, not immediate, but gradual, creeping into their expressions like shadows lengthening with the setting sun. The bride's father, usually so composed, so proud, suddenly stiffened. He moved closer to inspect the token, eyes narrowing, brow furrowing. Every laugh that had echoed in the hall earlier now felt like a distant memory, replaced by disbelief and quiet panic. They had mocked me, They had assumed, laughed, and dismissed. And now the evidence of their misjudgment confronted them silently, unmistakably. Their arrogance, their assumptions, their mockery, all reflected back at them in the simplicity of my preparation. I could see them in my mind, moving carefully through the suite, picking up each element I had left behind. The note, the token, subtle in placement but heavy with meaning, each item a reminder that appearances can deceive, that the quietest people sometimes carry the greatest strength. Their whispers began, hesitant and tinged with confusion, words chosen carefully as if testing the reality of what they faced. Did she do this? No, it can't be. Who? How? Each question unanswered, each thought racing as they realized the depth of what had transpired. I imagined the bride's expression shift from initial curiosity to dawning horror, then to a quiet, grudging respect she could not yet name. Her mother's face, too, reflected the same mixture: shock, regret, disbelief, all tempered by the slow understanding of what had been done, and by whom. And I, calm and composed, remained outside the suite, unseen, unacknowledged, yet fully present in every heartbeat, every reaction. The elegance of my revenge lay in this invisibility. There was no need for confrontation, no shouting, no anger, no spectacle. The moment was mine, executed with grace, and it spoke volumes more than any words could. I imagined the weight of their realization pressing upon them. Their laughter had vanished. Their pride had faltered. Their confidence had been pierced not by confrontation, but by the quiet precision of a woman they had underestimated. Each subtle gesture of surprise, each frozen expression, each gasp. These were my victories. I allowed myself a small smile, one that reflected not malice but satisfaction, and a deep understanding that justice had been delivered. Not cruelly, not vengefully in the shallow sense of retribution, but justly, elegantly, subtly. The bride's family would remember this evening, not for the champagne, not for the music, not for the grandeur of the wedding, but for the quiet, undeniable reminder that mocking and underestimating someone carries consequences. A lesson delivered not through spectacle, but through awareness, reflection, and the undeniable truth of preparation and foresight. I pictured their eventual conversations, the questions whispered late into the night, the attempts to rationalize what had occurred, and the lingering unease that comes when someone realizes they have been outmaneuvered, not by loud confrontation, but by quiet intelligence and patience. And I thought of my son, finally at peace in the celebration of his new life, unaware of the lesson his mother had quietly orchestrated. He would see later that strength often requires patience, that dignity often requires silence, and that true justice often arrives subtly, without theatrics, yet with far more lasting impact than any shouted accusation ever could. In that moment, I felt a surge of satisfaction. Not from pride, not from vengeance, but from the elegant execution of a plan that required nothing more than patience, foresight, and the quiet confidence of a woman who had lived, loved, and endured far more than anyone could imagine. The honeymoon suite, once a place of simple luxury, had become a testament to the quiet power of patience, dignity, and preparation. The bride's family would leave that night forever changed, aware that their laughter had been misplaced, that their arrogance had blinded them, and that the quiet mother they mocked had orchestrated a lesson they would never forget. I stepped away from the room, leaving them to their discovery, letting the realization unfold naturally. My revenge had been delivered flawlessly, quietly, and with grace. No confrontation was needed. The payoff was perfect. And for the first time that evening, I allowed myself to exhale fully, knowing that justice had been achieved in the most elegant way possible. Tonight they had learned that appearances deceive, arrogance misleads, and a quiet, underestimated woman can wield a power far greater than laughter, mockery, or wealth could ever convey. And with that thought, I left the suite behind, a small smile on my lips, my dignity intact, my plan executed perfectly, and my quiet triumph secured. As the night came to a close and the echoes of laughter and celebration faded from the halls, I took a moment to reflect. This evening had been about much more than a wedding. It had been a lesson, in patience, in dignity, in the quiet strength that often goes unseen. Family, respect, and true character reveal themselves not in appearances, but in how we carry ourselves when underestimated, when overlooked, when mocked. I thought back to the dress I had worn, the old blue dress that had drawn laughter and whispers. It had carried more than fabric. It had carried memories of a love that endured, a life that I had built with my late husband, and the quiet strength that comes from years of sacrifice. That dress had been a shield, a reminder of who I was, and of the legacy that no one could take from me. To the audience, I offer this truth. Never underestimate a quiet mother. Silence is not weakness. It is patience. It is observation. And when the time comes, it can carry the loudest, most unforgettable message. I smiled softly, touched the fabric of that cherished dress once more, and felt the presence of my late husband's love guiding me. The night had ended with dignity intact, lessons delivered, and justice achieved, quietly, calmly, perfectly. And in that quiet, I found peace.